Hi, and welcome to this third part on army building for Age of Sigmar. And in this one I want to talk about my potency tables. I do these for my Age of Sigmar army building. I used similar things before for Warhammer Fantasy Battles years ago. It's actually a lot easier to do it for Age of Sigmar. What it takes the form of is working out how much damage I can expect a particular unit to do. I'm quite an attack-minded player. I generally think in terms of having armies that are going to move forward and attack weak points in an opposing army, because most armies are going to excel at that. Very few armies have a lot of range. It's very opposite to 40k situations where there's a lot more emphasis on shooting at range. There's much less so in fantasy, and it has always been like that. There are some armies, just as there are in Age of Sigmar and there were in Fantasy Battle, that can do that very well. Most armies cannot, so you're going to be focusing on a force that closes down fairly quickly and gets the targets of your choice. That's ultimately what both forces want to do. You know, your opponent wants to hit your weakest units, you want to hit their weakest units, and so on. So what I do, if I show you the example of a Great Unclean one here, this is a one I did a while ago. I've slightly amended my format, but I'll show you some of those in a moment. So I've got the important stats in here: hit, wound, save, damage, and attacks. And you just simply need to work out your chance of doing each of these. So I'll put in the hit one. You know, in this case it says 0.67 because it's 3 plus to hit, so that's a 2/3 chance, so equals 2/3. Wound, that's obviously a 2 plus to hit, 5, 6, and so on. I can say there save 4. I'm assuming that the save of whatever I'm going to hit has a 4 plus. Now that's the only thing that is determined by the thing I'm hitting, the unit I'm attacking. Everything else, due to the streamlined nature of Age of Sigmar, is very much down to you personally. So your chance to hit is nothing to do with your opponent, unless of course they apply some special rule, which means you know, you're going to be at -1 to hit for whatever reason, you know, plague bearers, that sort of thing. So what I do is I say, okay, 4 plus save is quite generous for a lot of units, but let's say I need to go into something fairly beefy. Some of the stronger units may well have a 4 plus save, and also against characters they may have that or better, so maybe on average you're going to be getting into that, and it's all about doing on averages. The damage figure isn't always a set amount. Maybe it does D3 damage, maybe it does D6. So what I do in there is I put the average. So if it does D3 damage, I put 2 in, because that's the average of a D3. If it's D6 damage, I'll put 3.5 in. Same with the attacks there. You can see there's a 3.5 at the top, because that does D6 attacks. And then multiply it all together, and you get a result out of it, which I round off to 1 decimal place. And then you can add it up. You've got multiple, particularly in close combat, you've got multiple melee weapons. You can just add them all up. Now, what this is really useful for, so on the one hand, you can use it to work out how much damage you might expect to do. More on that later. But what you can also do, where you've got a range of options of melee weapons, you can choose which one's going to do the most damage. It actually seems strange to me that there are scenarios where you've got weapons that will all do the same thing. They've got no special rules, really. And one of them will just clearly do more damage on average than the other. Well, you just pick that. But occasionally there are weapons that have particular special rules. And that is the case with, say, the Great Unclean one. So the Doomsday Bell, you can see there, doesn't do a great deal of damage compared to, say, the Plague Flail, Massive Battlesword. But it has special rules. So with the Great Unclean one, for example, I get a choice of Plague Flail or Doomsday Bell. Well, Plague Flail on average is going to do 2.2 wounds a turn. Doomsday Bell is only going to do 0.9. Bit of a no-brainer. But the Doomsday Bell allows you and any Nurgle units very close by to increase their movement. So it has some strategic value there, in which case you don't just look at this from just a pure numbers point of view in terms of how much damage it do. You think to yourself, how much damage can I do by boosting the movement of some other units as well? So it allows you to consider how much you're losing by getting a strategic advantage. And if it doesn't seem that much, then it can be worth doing. On to the next one in terms of what else we can do with this. So what I usually do is I extend it. Here's the same thing again, the Great Unclean one, but with a few extra columns. So in there, what I've done is done the totals. Now, this, of course, isn't the totals of every single one of those result numbers, because, of course, I can't use all of those. I have to choose. So I've chosen the ones that are going to do, you know, the damage, the most damage. And it's only for the close combat as well, the melee weapons. The missile weapons I've kept separate there. I usually keep those as a separate thing. Then I've put the points in there. Then I've worked out where I've said in my column cost, what I do for this. And this is, you know, a little bit down to what you want to get out of it. What I have done to work that out is I've divided the points value by double the total plus the damage from the missile weapon. The reason being that in one battle round, you can fire off your missile weapons once, but you can potentially fight in close combat twice. So I put a greater weighting onto the damage I'm going to be doing in close combat. Now, of course, it could also be argued that if you've got fairly long range missile weapons, that you could actually shoot every turn, or every one of your turns in each battle round, but maybe not in fighting close combat because your movement may be slow. So that's an important point to bear in mind as well. And of course, for that, you have to bear in mind what is the range of the missile weapon. But coming on to movement, so what I've done here is I've got the similar tables for Blight Lords and Blight Kings for, again, Nurgle. Now, Blight Lords are very fast units. They can fly. They've got a very high movement value. Blight Kings have got a fairly low movement. They're pure infantry, so they're going to be moving fairly slowly. Now, if you look at it, in terms of the damage they can do, for fewer points, in fact, the Blight Kings can do more damage. And you can see that their cost efficiency, for want of a better term, is about, effectively double. It's what I'm basically saying is I am paying about 15 points per wound in a battle round for the Blight Kings, but 29 for the Blight Lords. However, the Blight Lords are much faster, which means they have a much better chance of picking out their target. The Blight Kings are much slower, which means if I try and pick out a target that I want to attack, then my opponent may well see that and move it away. And it'll be relatively straightforward to keep moving it away and avoid me, certainly avoiding me for a very long time. So what I then have to do is either tie it up in close combat with something else or shift it along somehow. Hence my potential thinking about a Doomsday Bell for a Great Unclean One, because it would give it more movement. But it would still fall significantly behind the Blight Lords. So sometimes you need to consider aspects of it beyond just how much damage they do. How much damage can you do against the thing you want to do the damage against? Now, here's another potential use for these potency tables. There's various people at my local club getting into Age of Sigmar, and one of them is wanting to build a Daughters of Cain army based around Morathi. And a lot of people are rather concerned about Morathi, thinking, how are we going to tackle her? Because the key thing with Morathi, and she's a bit of a beast when she changes into her super combat form, but she's also very defensive because she can only suffer 3 wounds in any turn. So that means it's going to take you a minimum of 2 full battle rounds at best to kill Morathi. So it's no good trying to work out, okay, how can I hammer her and do as much damage as possible to take her 12 wounds off? No good. If I hit her with everything I've got, doesn't matter that I might, in theory, do 12 wounds against her. I'm only going to actually do 3, come what may. So then, in my case, my attention turned to, okay, so how much damage is she going to do against me each turn? Because Morathi, as with any such behemoth type character or model, has attacks that will weaken the more damage she has taken. So what I've done here is worked out how much damage she's like to do. And I've worked this out against my Knight's Haunt. So with the save of a 4+, the rend is ineffective against Night Haunt. So I've included in that not only the 4+ save, but the 6+ chance I have to negate any saves that I fail because of deathless minions. So you can see in there that Morathi, even if she hits some wounds, only has a 0.42 chance of actually getting that wound to land. So I've worked it out here. So if she's taken no wounds at all, then she can, on average, expect to do about 5.4 wounds worth of damage against me. So I then have to think, so what can I get into combat with her to take that damage and then hopefully, although that'll be easier said than done, be able to replenish those wounds. If she takes 3 wounds of damage, so let's say I actually succeed, because I'm going to want to, of course, 3 wounds of damage before the next time she attacks, If I manage to do that, what's she going to do then? Well, then she's only on average going to do 4.4 wounds against me. So getting a bit weaker. If she takes 6 wounds of damage, she'll only do 3.8. If she takes 9 wounds, she'll only do 3 damage, and so on. So it moves down like that. And then you can see at the bottom there, I've tried to work out how much damage a couple of my more combat-focused Nighthawk units could potentially do against her. Both of them, you can see it's a little bit too generous, because in the case of Kurdos, he would do about 7.4 on average, and the Black Coach would do about 6.3 on average. And in each case, that is well above what I need. Obviously, I'm not going to pick a unit that's only going to do 3, because if I'm unlucky, I don't even do the 3. But ideally, I'd want it to be more like 4 or 5, so that I'm not wasting too much damage against Morathi, when there's the rest of the Daughters of Cain army to deal with as well. So these are the sorts of things I can also use it for if I have a particular unit that I'm worried about in terms of damage limitation. So if I go straight for it, what's it going to do to me before I can start to do the damage on it? How long is it going to take? How many wounds am I going to take in total? So we can see here, if I manage to tie Morathi down with a lump of my army, we can see here that before I would kill her, assuming that she was going first each time, which wouldn't always be the case, of course, then potentially she could be doing what we're talking about there, 10, 14, about 17 wounds worth of damage. So I need to be able to take about 17 wounds worth of damage. Now, the Black Coach could probably do that, because each turn it would, or each of my turns, it would heal some wounds back as well. It would just about be able to take her out. But of course, Morathi can move around. She doesn't have to be tied down to whatever I get into combat with her. That's another thing about it as well. So it's just some awareness of what she can do. Another little use for it here. Now, this table is absolutely terrifying. This is horrifying, in fact. It's the new Forge World model for the Khorne ability, the Khorne hero even, Volgoroth, which is a model that costs pretty much as a 2,000 point army. It costs 1,200 points. So I was working this out just idly. I'm not planning on doing a Khorne army anytime soon. The lack of magic, I find a little bit disappointing, even though I quite like the theme of Khorne. But I was thinking to myself, okay, so would this be worth getting a 2,000 point game? It's obviously going to do a lot of damage. Is it worth it for the points cost? And there's a couple of things about this. First of all, I could just straight up work out what its efficiency is, its cost efficiency. Now, you can see here straight away, I'll cut to the chase, it's coming out as 25. Now, that is very, very good value for its points. For a hero, that's excellent value. So actually, it is worth its points. But even if it weren't, if it was coming out at, a much higher value there, so in other words, not worth it, you still think about it this way. Because it can fly, has high movement, it can pick its target. And it can focus all of those attacks. Now, you imagine, let's say it did the same amount of damage as 1,200 points of normal units. Which is it better to take? Well, you'd say the normal unit surely is going to have... This has 30 wounds, which is a hell of a lot for one model. But 1,200 points of stuff is going to have more than 30 wounds. So you'd think, well, you'd take the 1,200 points of stuff. But would you? You can't possibly focus 1,200 points of unit onto a single point or a single unit that your opponent has. Whereas you can with this. But anyway, so what I did here is... so you've got the missile fire at the top there. You can see that does a fair amount. And then all sorts of other things. The Skull Cleaver Axe of Khorne has a special ability in there. And that's another thing you do with these potency tables, which I'll go on straight away after this, is sometimes you have to take account of special abilities. In this particular case, if they roll a 6 to wound, then it does an extra D3 mortal wounds on top of normal damage. So you factor that in as well. And this, I have to say, doesn't even take into account the fact that it will do extra damage if it targets a monster. And there is no monster that I have seen that would be considered a monster when faced off against this. And also, it can potentially do some damage on a charge as well, which I've not taken account of. So we can see here what I've done is I've worked out the total damage it's going to do in melee in close combat. I've done the same thing, and what I've done here is the points value divided by double the close combat attacks plus the missile attacks, because, I can only use the missile attack in my turn. It's got a hell of a range, though, 20-inch range. You'll be using that pretty much every turn. But I can potentially have close combat twice a battle round. And in fact, you'd be very likely to. That's another thing to consider as well. How likely are you to be able to get your, 2 rounds in each battle round of close combat? If you've got high movement, very likely. And that's a thing to think about there. And you can see it's working out at a cost of 25. I have to say that is very good value. I would consider some heroes to be good points, good value for their points, that would not come out as strongly as that. So you can see, if you have a 2,000 point corn army, I would look at this and I would go, you've got to get this model. Unless cost is an issue, which I can imagine it is. It is not cheap, and it would take a hell of a long time to assemble and then paint, I imagine. But at the same time, it is 100% worth it. So now what I'll be doing, now that I've done this potency calculation on it, I'll be thinking to myself, okay, so if I'm going to go to a tournament and it's 2,000 point games, there will be these. In fact, I would look, if I saw a corn player that did not have one of these, I would scratch my head and wonder what they're doing with their life, because it is absolutely awesome. I'm a little bit against things this overpowered, I have to say, but still, whatever. Now, in terms of just constructing these from a technical point of view, as I say, there are some special cases. So, for example, let's say you have your abilities as they are, but you can re-roll ones to hit. So how do you take account of this? Well, in the hit value, you put in your normal hit percentage, but you need to add on to that the chance of a 1/6 multiplied by your normal chance. So if you normally hit on 3+, but you can re-roll once to hit, it would be rolling a 3 plus 2/3 chance, so it would be 2/3 plus a 6 times 2/3, because after rolling that one, re-rolling it, there's still a 2/3 chance to then successfully turn it into a hit. Considering things like that, if you're re-rolling hits, failed hits completely, then in that case it would be 2/3 times 1/3, which is your chance to fail, times the 2/3 again, because you've still got to successfully hit after it. Little things like this you can put in there. If it's a case of, let's say, on a 6 to wound, as an example, as I talked about there, it will do D3 wounds in addition. That's easy to add on. You just, onto your results tab, just add on the hit chance multiplied by the number of attacks, multiplied by 1/6 for the wound, multiplied by, in this case, 2 for the D3 mortal wounds. But let's say instead of D3 mortal wounds in addition, it was just straight up D3 mortal wounds, then of course you need to modify it a little bit in the result. And what I would do is I would change the cell that's linked to the wound, and I would make that equal to the wound probability minus 1/6 to reduce that, and then add on the 6th chance with the extra stuff on it at the end. That's the way I would do that. But you do need a certain level of mathematical skill with it, a little bit of probability to make it work to your best advantage. And of course, what you also need to be aware of is what you're looking at. It's like with any stats, this is ultimately stats. You need to know what you're looking at. It's not the be all and end all of everything. Like I say, if I were to go back to when I was comparing the Blight Lords and the Blight Kings, I just think, just ram the army full of Blight Kings because they're extremely good value. But then they'd be very slow, and that wouldn't always be ideal either. You also have to consider this is just potency. It takes no accounting of how well I can defend against it. So an infantry army moving forwards, there's a difference between one that has like 1 wound per model and a 6+ save, and ones that might have 2 wounds per model and a 4+ save. And in terms of what's going to actually find itself in that combat, the 2 wounds a model and 4+ save is much more likely to weather that storm. So you have to consider things like that as well. Sometimes if the unit doesn't look like it's as good from this point of view, it may be that it's got other advantages such as special rules, special buffs that it can give to others, which overall might benefit it, and it might be able to hold on to its own wounds a lot better as well. But it does give you some good idea of which units are going to work well, and you can combine them like I talked about in the synergy video as well to see how they'd work together. It's definitely worth doing rather than simply just picking the ones that look like they do the most damage or, look like they'd be best. I always like to apply a little bit of maths to it. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you found it a little bit instructive. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. Comment down below, and particularly if you've got any further questions, I could always do a follow-up if necessary. Share with other people who might also be interested. Subscribe for further content, please. And until next time, I'll see you later.